There was one funny little bit there. One of the natives, as they ran by, had written on his forehead, "Eat at Joe's," and about 2 or 3 behind him, one of the natives had written, "I ate Joe."
Disney had to employ dozens of craftsmen to fabricate costumes and apply makeup for dozens of extras, as well as create one-of-a-kind props.
We had to build canoes for them. And it took a little time. We had to get it organized and rehearsed, and I wanted all the canoes to come out at the same time.
The most difficult part of working on location, shooting underwater. The difficulties of filming above water proved to be nothing compared to shooting underwater.
The film was made in Nassau, which is in New Providence Island in the Bahamas.
Lifford Key was uniquely situated on the western tip of New Providence Island. It was thought to be the ideal location, and coincidentally proved to be the exact spot where the earlier 1916 version of 20,000 Leagues was filmed.
It had extraordinarily clear water, and it was the primo place to shoot underwater films.
But the location was still quite remote, and more than 20 tons of equipment ranging from a 30-cent screwdriver to 3 specially rigged underwater cameras had to be transported in 212 wooden crates. And that was only the beginning of the countless problems and setbacks for the team.
Everything worked against our being speedy on this.
Any filmmaker will tell you that working on water is difficult enough, but working beneath it is even worse.
The sea is there to defeat you. And it's always an opponent. Never helps very much. It's always trying to do you a damage.
It was decided that experimental one-of-a-kind diving gear had to be designed to meet the specific needs of the story and the production. So the suits were built and then shipped to the Bahamas. But it was equipment that to date had only been tested in a shallow pool at Disney Studios. Would they work in real-world conditions?
It was quite an adventure. I mean, people were scuba diving before that word had been invented. Everything they were doing down there was experimental. It was a pretty amazing operation.
The fantastic Verne-like suits designed by Harper Goff with technical support from diving expert Fred Zendar worked perfectly. And in fact, one of the key elements of the diving helmet was suggested by yet another diver, Al Hansen.
These were built over sponge diving helmets the Japanese used for sponge diving things. That's that part of the helmet. They made this piece to go on it.
Goff's imaginative diving suits were not only visually innovative, but practical.
All of the guys playing the parts of Nemo's men that were marching around in those big diving suits along the bottom were all in these suits, but the apparatus on their back, they were actually using scuba gear inside the suits, even though they looked like diving suits.
The real helmets were quite heavy because they were real metal helmets. No way you could hold these things up out of the water. Now here's an interesting point with this helmet. If you see these little tubes right here, these are film spools for 35mm and 60mm film when you process it.
The suits were 16th-inch thick rubber. They had cuffs on them, rubber cuffs that were very tight. You had to put those on with soapy water because they were really tight. We had a helmet plate that went around that was incorporated in the rubber suits.
Each diver could only be fitted into their suits with the help of assistants. The suits had to be watertight and could only be secured with dozens of nuts, bolts, and screws.
Our tanks were in back of us, and they stayed there. We used the same tank. A tender would make sure that those tanks were filled every day. The helmet from the back, they had 2 inlets for compressed air from scuba tanks that we had on our backs, and they went into the helmet. And inside the helmet, we had a regulator with a rubber hose that we kept in our mouths all the time. There was a group that were stand-ins for the main actors as Captain Nemo and Peter Lorre. They had the same physical features and heights, but they were stand-ins, and they weren't divers per se, they were actors. The diving shoes were just the regular Navy diving shoes, but they made boots out of them. They extended the canvas up to make it look better. We had a weight belt, had a knife, and that was about it.
All told, this complicated diving apparatus weighed over 150 pounds.
The problem was the air supply for these people, because they were all using aqualungs. And the actor divers, the ones that you see in those big suits, were in particular danger because they couldn't swim. They had lead weights in the boots to keep them in the water, not floating away.
If you had any troubles at all, you just raised your hand. And there was a fellow there that he watched for that, and they would send the lifeguards there, and they pulled you back up.
There was a safety man underwater for every 2 divers or crew members. And for each of the principal actors, they each had 1 safety man who just watched them.
You had a little tank in the front. It was a reserve tank, but it was mostly for a show. You could get about 3 breaths out of it, I think, if anything happened. But we did have those on. But you had an hour of air.
The timing for that hour was timed from the first man went on air while he was still on the barge that we worked off of out in the water until the last man came out of the water was 1 hour. By the time we got to the location and set up, we had just a few minutes to shoot the scene.
We didn't walk to the scene.
They had to be pulled through the water by ropes attached to an Avon dinghy.
We hung on that on ropes, and they took us out to where the scene was, and we slid down the rope.
And while there were those who had their hands full simply getting the actor divers to the location, the rest of the crew seemed to be constantly hauling rigging, scaffolding, tripods, and the camera in and out of the water. With all these time-consuming limitations, the crew could only make 4 dives a day. The very first underwater scene to be shot proved to be the most difficult.
The burial of one of our crewmen.
What I did was assemble everybody that was going to be in the scene and rehearse the scene on dry land so that everybody understood exactly what they were going to do when they got below.
Fred Zender was the one who got the scene from the director, and he came to us and explained it all. They had a chalkboard, and they figured out positions of everybody, and then Zender would come back to us, and he directed us as individual divers underwater, told us where to stand and everything, and everything that the director told him to do above the surface.
And we had to work out for that a series of hand signals to communicate with the actors and with the crew. And so we drew up a board that listed all the various hand signals and their meanings. Everybody had to memorize this chart with all the hand signals, and the Disney artist drew very sketchy pictures. And there was one blank space left over, And so the artist drew in a diving figure going, which meant, I don't know what to do. And that's the one we use most of the time.
It was very well organized, very well organized. It was the weather that was the biggest problem.
Using the sun as its only light source, the crew couldn't shoot anything underwater when the sky became cloudy.
The beginning, it just went on and on. The sky clouded up, and you had to have sun to really get some good film down there. It clouded up, I think the first 3.5 weeks, the sun kept going out, and it went on and on and on. In fact,